Let's do it.
So actually, I'm going to start by getting the visual editor out of the way because I wanted to show that last week. I did it
Cool.
last week, and then I forgot to demo it in our weekly update.
Okay.
But you've seen it already. It's basically a prototype of some kind of node-based visual programming environment. People might be familiar with this for doing like expression trees. The difference in this, and the reason why I was excited to start playing with this now, is because not too long ago, Unreal, Blueprints, and other game editors came up with a way to actually model control flow in a more natural way, or a way that maps to actual like imperative programming. And so it's basically this idea where every node has control flow connections, as well as connections for expressions for inputs and outputs. And so this is based on a prototype that a friend made visually, and then this library is called JS Plum, which is just connecting these divs up. So this is built in HTML5. This is a really simple prototype. And it doesn't actually do anything, but I'm trying to build up the primitives to then build, arbitrary data-driven nodes and their connections, and then I can use that to generate Go code. And so in this environment, you'll be able to write Go code or do a visual thing or go back and forth. So that's something from last week. Also, this week I've been a little weird because my friend passing away basically right when we were doing or I heard about it right when we were doing our update last week. But I did get stuff done this week. Let's see, what should we talk about? Oh, one of the things that we got done was Program TV is finally back up.
Woo!
I think on my channel I don't see ads because I'm an affiliate or something. I don't know, but this is a new account, Program TV, so now there's ads. But if you go to the Program TV Twitch account, you can watch tons of content.
What he did is go on to create procedures.
Right now it's playing
for
some
revitalizing the remnants of
stuff,
creativity in adults. They're
All curated.
Yeah, so
The awesome part.
there's a lot of stuff in here. It's not just talks, it's not just tech, it's a lot of it's art, a lot of it's sort of things that were very influential to me or very inspiring. And it's basically like, one way I use this channel is like I can rewatch almost anything that I put on it, and so it's something I can easily just like turn on. It's like my equivalent of TV. It's like I can just turn it on. I don't have to pick what to watch. It just like plays something interesting. And even though I've seen everything before, it's still the way I consume and process information. It's like, oh, I'm re-inspired, or oh, I forgot about that, or I didn't hear that the first time, and stuff like that. So it also has a very intentional sort of aesthetic requirement. Not all the videos have it, but almost everything on there feels like it's kind of a VHS recording, because most of it is. There's a lot of content that was basically taped or old film and stuff like that. So it's very retro. It's currently in the retro category on Twitch. But the reason I was running this as a pilot on my account when I wasn't streaming like this right now, but one of the first uses that we can actually use the Unraid box for is to stream this. So I think you helped me out this week getting this working, because I needed my my OS X VM to be accessible over VNC or remote desktop, because it wasn't like a performance intensive thing. I want like a convenient thing that I can get to control it. And so we got it working. And so now I can just leave this screen sharing thing open if I want and just access it here. I can even tell it to synchronize with my YouTube playlist, which is how I add stuff to the to it. So that's there, and I have all kinds of plans for Program TV, but this is sort of still
Quick question.
early thing.
How are you doing that? Like, what's the mechanism to go from just putting it in a YouTube library to it streaming over that? Is there something in OBS that allows it to just look directly at like a YouTube channel, or?
No, but you can point VLC to, or you can point the VLC. You can point a VLC source in OBS to, for example, a playlist or a directory. So right now I just have it pointing to a directory, and then I have YouTube DL, which is a command line tool that lets you download YouTube videos. It has the ability to synchronize with a playlist. So it keeps track of what it already has, and I can just run this again, and it'll... right now it's downloading the 20 new videos that I had added to the playlist since I last synchronized.
Nice.
So that's Program TV for now. Good stuff, good content, now running 24/7.
Woo!
What else? Unraid? Oh yeah, you've got an Unraid update maybe?
Well, I sort of have an update. So
you're gone.
Last year, I had heard about this project that was being worked on called Looking Glass, and it allows you to essentially have like an uncompressed frame buffer of the VM exposed to another client. So the cool thing about this is like the number one use case is basically for games. The idea that you could be using your Linux main machine, and then you have a Windows VM that you run this host on, and in Linux you can just open up like basically a high-res screen sharing situation. And it turns out that you had showed me that they're doing a ton of work on it, and it looks a lot more stable and mature now.
You saw it a year ago?
Yeah, so I tried it in summer of 2018. So I'm going to give it a twirl. The setup looks pretty simple. I already compiled the host. And I'm going to try it on Linux first. And then I'll do it with Windows. But yeah, it's cool because, you know, VNC kind of sucks, basically.
Yeah.
It's slow. All screen sharing tools are just slow. They don't feel native.
Well, you know, I've noticed that there are like the protocol is different than the implementations. Like you can find higher performance implementations of the VNC protocol or whatever the protocol is that VNC uses. But like the obvious thing that it can't do is what like the Shield does, which is sort of working with hardware to get lower latency. And I don't know what Looking Glass is trying to do. It's, I guess, just trying to do every other trick to try and lower latency. Does Looking Glass actually try and work with the hardware to...
Yeah, so as far as I know, what it's doing is it looks directly at the frame buffer, but it has something to do with DirectX, I think. No, I don't know if that's true or not. But it looks directly at the frame buffer and then uses a file that you mount inside the VM, and it communicates that way.
What was that other one, the open source Shield? Moonlight?
Oh, Moonlight?
Yeah. How's that different?
That's what I currently use. That relies on Shield being installed.
Okay.
So that's the difference.
Cool, and you gave me a new USB controller I can try. Hopefully I can get my audio interface working, because I would love to play with, what's it called, Bitwig, and actually set up a good audio. Or I'd like to even try just doing audio on the Unraid machine. For people that forget, it's this machine here. That is really doing nothing right now except running a VM that streams Program TV. because I have certain hardware that doesn't quite work with it yet. And other things. Slowly but surely, we will get it working and prove a new model of, I don't know, computer architecture or something. Cool. Now let's see. We got a couple more things. Actual progress on Tractor, the editor, the programming environment. Let me pull that up.
Yes. Very cool.
So not this, but so actually, so last week we roughly got kind of everything working in broad strokes, and so this week I was trying to start seeing what it's like to build components, because that's sort of like, you can kind of compare it to like when Bell Labs invented Unix shell pipelining. They had to invent the shell and pipes before you could make programs that would work together. And so I've had to create this platform and this environment and data structure and user interface before I can actually start building commands or components that can be put together. But now I need to actually like prove it out. And one of the original things that I wanted to prove, because I want you to be able to manage remote resources, and I wanted you to do that in a way that was basically like Terraform or configuration management, where you define your ideal state as this is what I want declaratively, and then it can and defining connections between things, and then Terraform or some orchestrator can basically execute that or converge actual state by working with APIs, etc. And what Terraform does, it's better than any configuration management before, is it's made for network or cloud resources. So, things take a lot longer, and so it actually will do things in parallel and try and speed things up. And so ultimately I might end up wrapping Terraform in some way, but I wanted to at least figure out how that could be kind of like a more native-like experience in this interface. And because at some point I need this to run on servers, I thought, oh, well, maybe if I were to make the components needed to deploy this thing itself onto a DigitalOcean server, that'd be cool. So I kind of I've started figuring out how to like spec out or mock out components and how they might interact on my iPad. And so you can imagine a DigitalOcean node that has a couple of components, maybe authentication to DigitalOcean, and then a resource manager, which more or less does this sort of Terraform orchestration. And what it'll do is look for any children under this node that are resources, and then depending on how it's configured, it'll try and apply any changes to those configurations. And there would also be something to signify whether it's in sync or not. But it turns out I can't actually do this green icon in the tree view right now with VS Code. Although I'm talking to somebody who has experience with the VS Code code base, so that's actually cool. You should be able to do some customizations. So you'd create a server, and that server is going to have like a droplet component, which represents a resource. You need to define some state, and then in theory, depending on how the resource manager is set up, it would then create that server. So now this represents a remote resource, but I can then combine that with a component that knows that there's Docker on that machine or a Docker endpoint, and in theory, I can add a component on the same node as the server, and it'll automatically link them up somehow. And then, kind of like Juju, if people have worked with some orchestration DevOps stuff, there's a little bit of automatic connecting things going on here, at least that's planned. From there, I can then define containers that I run on there, etc., and I can kind of organize them in this tree however I want. And I'm only modeling what I need to model, right? Which I think is interesting. Like, you don't have to deal with other things that DigitalOcean has. You're just dealing with the things that you need. I need the server that runs containers. So I tried doing this and it ended up being complicated because there are a lot of simpler problems that needed to be proved first. So I quickly switched over to something simpler, building an HTTP server using Go's standard library components. And so I started sketching this out. What would it look like? All right, so let's say we have a server node, and I could probably point this out a little easier. All right, so say we have a server node, and it has a component that's an HTTP server mapping directly to the Go struct, more or less mapping to the server in Go standard library. And I was thinking about how setting it up would work. You know, one thing that you have to do is tell it what address to listen on, what port. And normally I might do that with a string listen adder. But because Go is designed to work with interfaces and, you know, the interfaces in Go are just amazing. The idea that you could also point it to another object that has a listener, because that listener could be virtual or it could do something weird with ngrok or whatever, making that a reference would be an option that I want as well. And I came to the conclusion that I should just always do things that way and not try and do both, like, oh, put in an address or put in a listener. I'm trying to simplify and say always have a listener. And then server has a handler which implements the HTTP handler API, which is just like, all right, given the request, here's a response. So the way this would work is, I create a server and then I could add another component on there for the listener. And the idea is for every node, any component that requires something that takes an interface, it'll automatically look at other components on this node to see if they implement that interface, and it'll automatically link them up. So this server, and in this case, it's sort of a custom handler. Again, this is all sort of theoretical or imaginary. And this theoretical muxer, there's handler, basically provides a mux where it's going to, which is kind of like routes, it's going to decide what handler to use based on the children of this node. And I created 2 files and template. And then there's also middleware, and I thought maybe this was an interesting place to do middleware. So maybe we do a single user basic auth protection thing. You could imagine any other kind of security or authorization stuff that could be wrapped up as a component. And again, all of these just kind of link up together automatically. And then I'll show you in the example that I have working that this handler could also be something custom through a delegate. So files is a child node that has 2 components on it. One of them is a path that represents a file path on the system, and it implements a number of interfaces that are useful, the HTTP file system interface, as well as the Affero file system interface. So any other component could then use this path as a API basically now. And so if I just add a imaginary file server component to this, it's going to see that there's another component that implements HTTP file system, and so it'll serve this path at files. And so files/whatever will represent files here, and it'll just serve those up. Another interesting, like if I want to do something dynamic, like render a template, I wanted to imagine what that would be like. So let's do a template endpoint that has maybe a template renderer, where maybe we give it data, maybe it comes with, maybe templates have access to the entire data tree. That would make sense. But similarly, we need a template input for this. Maybe that's just a string based on the Go APIs that exist. And so I thought maybe we could have a file local component that actually, unlike path, which represents an arbitrary path on this system, file local represents a file in this workspace, and you can hit edit and edit it, and then that will automatically be used in this template renderer. And so that's the kind of thing that I wanted to prove out. I could keep going, but I decided if I could get this working, that would be a good start. I wanted to point out that this stuff is kind of, there's different levels of programming. Usually when people say programming in the small or programming in the large, people don't say that very often. programming in the large, the reason why people say that is usually dealing with workflow. So like business processes, how do you write a program that will, given some input, trigger a predefined process that might involve interacting with people that might span like a week or something like that, right? A program that takes a week to run. That's not the typical programs that we write, but I'd like to be able to write those or assemble those. And in between, you can imagine the smallest programming in the large is maybe algorithms, but maybe a step up from there is dealing with kind of system level stuff, which is maybe what I think of with Go servers and stuff like that, right? Because a lot of programming environments that try and make programming easy, they don't actually let you do everything that you can do as a programmer in a programming environment, like build an HTTP server. So it's important that we can do that. And then somewhere else in the middle, you have like app level programming or orchestration level programming, like DevOpsy, distributed system stuff. And I want to be able to support the entire range of programming in the small and programming in the large. But just to get these things proven, I need to do programming in the small in this sense. And then later I can come back to more complex things that are more about programming in the large, which is more about like this orchestration stuff. Okay, quick demo. So I'm going to create a node that is our web server. And I didn't get very far, actually, because there's a bunch of, and this is the whole point of this, is this uncovered a bunch of like holes or things that I missed when I first, prototyped this data structure and how everything kind of comes together. But here's our server, which is, a web server. It needs a listener and a handler. And we have a listener here. Here's a TCP listener, and we'll say it listens on 8080. And normally this would link up sort of as you add things, but it doesn't do that quite yet. So I'm just going to restart, because it does that on start. It links everything up. So you can see, okay, we have the listener. What about a handler? And this is, we can do a custom handler, which is basically a copy of this one. So our delegate, we don't have a delegate. We add a delegate. We edit this delegate. We've created a message field, and we've implemented the HTTP serve interface. So if we save this, we see we have a message here. I can say hello world. This is not linked up yet. It would be linked up pretty instantaneously, but let's just restart it. And so now
I love that icon you have, by the way.
Which one? The tractor?
The tractor icon.
Yeah, I think that's God, what is it? Awesome font, awesome icon.
Nice.
So everything's linked up now, and in fact, it says there's a TCP listener at 8080. It's our HTTP server, so we could do curl localhost 8080, and we get hello world. We can change this message, right? And it behaves differently. And so that's how you could wire up a basic custom HTTP server. And, in theory, at some point, this little hook, glue code, basically low code, delegate programming, could eventually be done visually with this environment, but we're not quite there yet. These could just as easily point to other nodes, and the difficulty here, basically I ran into some fundamental problems. In order to get the auto connecting to work, I'm using a lot of Go reflection, and that took like 2 days to get right. And it's funny, like in the end, it was for like 10 lines of code. 2 days to get 10 lines of code to work. Working with Go reflection is very tedious. but ultimately I was trying to find, this is actually a very simple example of what it's doing behind the scenes. When you create components and add them to the tree, they're added to various registries, and those registries, so for example, here's a registry, a pretend registry. It's got, we have a couple of types here, type A and type B, which are pretty much the same thing, but they're separate. Type A implements this foo interface. And so that's that. And we create a couple instances. Most of them are type B, but then one of them is type A, this one that says me. And so what I needed was a way to say, given, let's say I'm reflecting on the struct that I want to link up, I have a field and it takes an interface, a net listener. So that's the equivalent of my interface. How do I look that up? How do I get the value out of here that implements my interface, which would be type A here? And how do I basically get that out of this registry? And so in Go, because there aren't generics, there's a pattern of basically defining a type beforehand and then passing a reference to it into something that will then assign that value. So this is how unmarshalling works, like working with JSON. Except it's not that simple, and we're using a lot of reflection. And even though I got it to work with interfaces and types, I then had to deal with the problem that, well, I'm looking up the fields, these types, through reflection as well. And so I need something, then this needs to behave slightly differently in order to work with reflected values. So this took 2 days to figure out, and then, or actually this took a day to figure out, and then I realized a huge problem in the data structure for how this tree is serialized, which is just JSON, or rather it's a file system with JSON files. But if you serialize a data structure that has pointers to other things, for example, this server, which has pointers to these other things, when it's serialized, it just copies them, and then it can't unserialize that copied data into a pointer because it doesn't, it's not going to create a new instance of that. It needs to point to an instance of an existing thing. And so this ended up, there's kind of a chicken or egg situation where as you're unserializing this tree, you might not have unserialized the nodes that you're going to be referencing when you get to this node. So I had to do this kind of tricky, because the Go JSON parsing is kind of stateless, so you can't have like context unless you do it by hand. And so I had to do this thing where I would go and find all references, all situations where there is a reference, replace that in the data structure with something that I could pick up later and do a second pass on, kind of a mark and sweep thing. And then I come back around and then look up the references and then assign those. Anyway, all of that works now. It just took way too long, and I was a little bit surprised that I hadn't figured that out. Or it's not too surprising because it was a difficult problem, so obviously I was like, I'll figure that out later. But the end result is that these things are now able to kind of snap together without you having to like go to listener and point to itself or whatever. It can just automatically connect things up, which I think is really cool. That's, I think, about it. There's another thing too that I started the agent because these things need to run even when the editor's not running. So we need this sort of like thing that runs over here that will continue to run the process and tell me if the process is running. And if I click it, it'll open the editor and let me turn it on and off. I'm handing that project off to a new intern.
Nice.
And what else? I guess that's it.
I have a question for you. Do you have something in mind that's sort of like, itching you're in the back of your mind that you want to make with this? Like, what's the first use case?
Unfortunately, I have like
50 use cases.
Yeah. So picking the things to prove is, you know, a little difficult because like I said, I wanted to start with that DigitalOcean stuff, but that's a little too complicated. And there's other stuff I needed to figure out first. So I'm trying to start with the simplest things. And to me, the simplest things are stuff that's already in the Go standard library. And then proving that out will show that, like, oh, you can kind of use this paradigm for anything, because if you can do it with anything, you know, in Go, then like anything else is possible too. So, I mean, I can think of basically any system that I want to build or automate in real life, I want to do in this as well. So things to manage program TV, right? There's a limitation in, you know, how videos are played. Right now, the VLC video source can only play a playlist in order or shuffle. It's like, well, what if I want something that's like, all right, here's a block of programming of like things that I want to show, but these are in a series. Like this is Computer Chronicles episode 1, and then here's all the other episodes. And then every time it plays it, it's going to increment and play the next episode. And that kind of logic is something that, you know, I don't know any off-the-shelf anything that does that. So it seems like I should be able to build that pretty easily. I'd also like to remotely control OBS this way so I can do more programmatic things and automations and stuff like that, so that OBS, so I don't have to be over here switching as much. I can automate more of that. I'm trying to think of some other recent examples of things. When you were showing me Bitwig, I was thinking about how they would integrate. Maybe I generate MIDI in my system, and then Bitwig, you know, has everything else.
Yep.
Yeah, nothing else is coming to mind, even though I have a whole list of things to build with this. My stream game.
Dude, that's a fucking batshit crazy idea that you just fucking blurted out. Like imagine a web server is, you know, doing something. You can transform whatever events to MIDI, and then the MIDI is fed into some system, and you could make music off of like a web server. That's fucking crazy. That's insane. I'm gonna try and do that. Holy shit.
Oh no. What have I done?
What have I done? You're all, no, don't do that. Don't stop that.
Or we were just playing with this in Discord. Josh made his clone of Restream, which I use. It's like, well, I would love to not use Restream or have a more programmable or more like version of Restream, and if I could have that as a component. And so we get into the video stuff and what are the video components, but you know, I think you and I have been talking about, wouldn't it be great if we had these primitives where you can just take like a stream of video and then like do different things with it and pipe it here and split it, and you know, there's kind of rudimentary things for that you could do in Go, but then this will give it that kind of like visual, more interactive way of working with it, that you can then integrate with other stuff easily. So we'll see. Like, this isn't even exciting yet. Like, it's not even like the basics are barely even there. So it's really hard to be like, see guys, it's the future. But we'll get there soon.
Yeah, I love it. You know, this is reminding me of this video. I may have seen it on your program TV or just when I was like, you know, searching around YouTube. It's this like AT&T put it out. It's like Intro to Linux or something. And it's just a bunch of Linux people, or Intro to Unix, sorry. And it's just a bunch of programmers describing like basically piping.
Yeah.
They're like, look, you can do capitalize and then into search and then into this. And it's like, it just kind of feels like
that's a great video because
kind of
they're basically talking about their intentions, which is, hey, you know, can we make more or less, can we make programming or assembling, they're talking about building blocks. They're like, can we make it easier to just assemble building blocks so that programmers and non-programmers could do things more easily. So they're trying to raise the bar of accessibility, not through like a new language, but through a new paradigm, right? This shell and piping, and that's been like a question that when I started talking, or basically around the time of webhooks, was when we were all asking, what is the equivalent of pipes for the web? And back then we had the Yahoo Pipes prototype, but all that was RSS. That was a visual programming node-based thing, but all that did was it was a data flow thing, and it was basically only RSS. So it was a really cool concept that eventually disappeared, but was not really what I wanted. It's like, like everything I've seen that has to do with visual programming or making programming more accessible is focusing on like data processing. It's like data, like I understand that that's like a thing that we have, and like big data, and there's, but like to me that's different from building systems that do things, that augment your capabilities, that allow you to do more with less. That's not a data problem. That's a building functionality. That's building systems. And no visual programming environment that I've seen that basically says, hey, we were trying to democratize programming, or we're trying to make programming available to anybody. They're always just like basic data flow things, like if this, then that, like, oh, something happens here, so post the data there. That's a very common use case. And so obviously those work, and you have Zapier and you have all these things, but when you get into more complex systems, like you can't build a web server with those tools. Is it really programming if you can't like program anything? Because that's what programming is. It's you can build anything that your mind imagines that you can model. If your programming environment does not allow that, it's not programming. So hopefully I can make that point obvious once this exists. Do you want to talk about your documentary project?
Sure. Yeah. So we're doing a documentary for Hacker Dojo's 10-year anniversary.
Coming up.
And it's sort of, it's coming up on October 5th and 6th in Santa Clara. And it's turning into essentially like an oral history is what we're going to do. We're going to do a 30-minute oral history sort of documentary modeled after Ken Burns style documentaries. And Ken Burns is like a famous documentarian. I mean, he's so famous, like Apple products have Ken Burns like presets in them, like on Apple TV for the screensaver and all that stuff. But it's just really good stuff. So we basically cut together a 30-second trailer. We were thinking about doing a longer form trailer, but at this point, we kind of feel pretty strong about what we're going to do with the footage and how we're going to put it together after this 30-second sort of experiment. So we're just going to go straight on to the next, to cutting together the 30-minute version. Do you want to play the trailer?
Yeah, let me do that.
Yeah, just the full version.
For me, the Hacker Dojo was my first home.
I was really excited about at the time was building it towards being a college campus with no college.
All the companies around here come here. We have Intel, Google, Microsoft, Amazon.
In a lot of really critical ways, the Hacker Dojo was there at the early part of the story.
But what is it? What is Hacker Dojo?
you don't even know. Yeah, we're still gonna sync up with Ed and make sure like what kind of information he wants to display on the end screen, and then also like the movie, like maybe it's not the movie, it's it's something else. But yeah, we still have a few things to edit there.
Did you do the music?
No, the music is from that guy, Polarity.
Oh, God.
Who, dude, because I was just, I've been looking up this guy, his producer name is Polarity. He makes a lot of presets and devices for Bitwig Studio. And I was just looking through his music as just a first pass, because he's released a bunch of stuff, and I found something pretty awesome. I mean, obviously I'm gonna, maybe try to do the music for the 30-minute, because I kind of have this vision of releasing like a short a soundtrack to it or something, and all these tie-ins.
So he does a lot of videos. Are some of these like tutorials for Bitwig, or are they tutorials for his plugins?
So I've seen a couple types. One is a tutorial. Tutorial is a strong word. He kind of just shows you and puts text on the screen how maybe a device works. An example of that is he has something called I think it's called Ultra Chord, and it's supposed to be just a chord exploration tool. A lot of those are coming around now, where you can just say, hey, play a chord progression with a 1-4-6-1 or whatever.
Yeah, those are kind of necessary when you get into generative music. They're really helpful to just work with instead of having to put in a chord or a scale, you can just pick it or have it randomly select or whatever. If it's modeled, you can do interesting stuff.
The other one, which is probably the more interesting one to me, is he just live streams himself building devices in this language. And I was literally just yesterday watching, and I just watch about 10 minutes, pause it, and then just recreate what he did and understand how and why he was doing those things. And it's the most useful education about DSP ever.
Yeah, I'm excited to watch some of these videos where he's building stuff from scratch, because I want to learn Bitwig. I would love to get more into generative music stuff. Rich is also all about that. I wonder if he's been playing with Bitwig. Cool. So Bitwig. What else do we got? Share something. What do we got to share?
Yeah.
What do you got?
Okay, so what I got, last week I did a technical book, and I'm gonna do a fiction book this time. I found this through the Twitter page of one of the people that was interviewed for the Hacker Dojo documentary. It's called Damon by Daniel Schultz, and it's a tech thriller type of book. The interesting thing about him and his story is that he self-published this, I believe, in 2011. He was originally a contractor for tech work or something, and then he started releasing these sort of tech thrillers. I've read maybe about 12% of it so far on my Kindle, and immediately it's not great. The characters are extremely predictable and cliche and all this, but it's awesome that people are pushing that storyline. I was thinking about, on Netflix or Amazon, I don't see any tech thrillers really. Mm-hmm. They're not something you push out. So this is sort of another theory I have with Mark to well, maybe we can work with this guy and pipeline it, because these are low quality stories in a way, but that's great, because making low quality cheap films is easy. So it's okay, well, can we pipeline his stuff? We do an adapted screenplay, and we can shoot it for under $100,000, something like that. So, and then you fill that void of lack of tech thriller content.
Can I produce?
Oh God, yes, please. Yeah. So that's what we're trying to work into that. I just had Mark watch a bunch of all the tech thrillers that have been released recently, Black Hat with Chris Hemsworth. Did you see that?
No.
It's so terrible.
I imagine
it's
there's
on my
a bunch of new ones that are stupid. I'm only thinking of the old ones. Remember Antitrust?
Oh God, yeah. I just remember Tim Robbins' ponytail.
Yeah.
He was basically Bill Gates.
Graduating students.
Oh man.
Here, I'll play the trailer.
You have a magnificent foundation.
This is a low quality trailer,
The
but
guy's a fascist monopoly. Exactly. The guy knows how to get people's attention. He does, man. Hello?
Milo? This is Gary Winston. I've heard great things about your work.
Okay, I don't know who this is, but your timing really blows because I just saw him in a live chat.
Well, I'd love to show you some of the things we're doing here.
Who was it?
You're one of maybe 20 programmers with the mastery it's going to take to change the world.
You gotta see this.
Digital canvas.
Doesn't Bill Gates have something like that?
They're watching him.
What'd you do with $1 billion, Milo?
What do you think?
I think we should sleep on it.
oh my god.
This is the technology that will fuel business for the next 30 years.
Can you get this done in time to meet your date?
With you, I can.
Pretty famous around
Wait,
here.
what was that dollar graphic?
You know what? I gotta put these trailers on program TV.
Who's doing all this?
Somebody, yeah.
Every time I get jammed up, Gary comes up with something.
It was such a stupid, like,
I keep my journal right next to my bed.
it's like they're,
It disappeared. Doesn't it seem kind of strange?
I think it's part of a camera.
I need to tell
apparently, they're like a Microsoft company, but they're like somehow putting cameras into like startups and like whatever, and like stealing their code and then murdering them.
It's almost like they know what every kid's doing.
He's building this network of satellites.
You kind of jumpy, Milo.
Hurry up. You're not losing your hold.
Hey, don't knock
Why don't
it.
you
That
just do
sounds like
something about
it
that
could
girl,
still
Lisa?
work.
We got our eyes on her. The guys invested billions on getting
Just
there
tweak
first.
it a little bit.
Do a reboot of Antitrust.
How do you let go of a secret without telling the wrong
That's
person?
amazing.
Who knows who they're paying?
Do you remember another hacking
Good chess
hacker
player
movie
always knows his
from
opponent's
that
moves
era?
before he
Came out in
makes them.
2000. It's called Takedown.
Oh yeah,
And
that
it was sort of about Kevin Mitnick.
yeah.
Um,
It was always talked about as like the sequel to Hackers, the unofficial sequel to Hackers.
yeah, has nothing to do with it.
Yeah. I don't know. I liked Antitrust. It's stupid, but it was one of the few like movies where they were using technology in a somewhat realistic way.
I'm gonna have to download that. I haven't seen it in a while. Boom. Antitrust.
So I'm also sharing a video. I don't have a book, but I have one of the things that I added to Program TV is a lot of stuff from the AT&T archives, but this one stood out. It is and not as like an interesting, I mean, it's kind of interesting, but it's more of an aesthetic and humorous thing. It's called Looking Ahead to the Information Age in 1985. It's a little short video with great sound and silly
what is happening now is a more
infomercial
fundamental,
graphics.
profound change
Love it.
But what's
that mankind
exciting,
has ever experienced.
what I thought was funny, let's see, where is it?
People are able to work at home or telecommute.
And there's a lot of these videos,
Still
but this one
wakes us in
is
the morning. Fibers of glass
the host
carrying
of this
thousands of messages at lightning speed.
is Donald Trump's brother.
Welcome to the information age. I'm Robert Trumbull, and I'm here to
Robert
take you on
Trump.
a journey through mankind's history.
Really?
To
Wow.
the threshold of a world
I didn't
of
know he had a
wonders.
brother.
A world of wonders.
I'm sure he doesn't want
That's
anybody to
exactly.
know he has brothers.
In the agricultural age, life was based on the lessons
There's
man
also
learned
like
from his
this section with some
department.
great
The
illustrations.
engineer designs the product
I love
and
these,
sends the plans
this
to the
era, this style of
who programs the plans into his computer,
visualizations,
which
especially for like
automatically
technical
regears
things.
the assembly line
Mm-hmm.
and orders the parts from inventory.
I was
The
watching this
advertising
pretty
department develops
stoned,
the new
and so I was
product
noticing a lot of the like really
And the sales
ridiculous
team is-
things in this. Like
As critical to economic development in the information
towards the
age,
end, he's talking,
as
and
good
then
highways were to economic development in the industrial age.
he walks down some steps, kind of a long cut. He's like looking at the
Plans
ground
that
and then
free
looks up
American
and starts talking.
information
There's
age
these great
companies
moments
to
where he
use
just
their
like
resources to introduce
almost a parody of itself, but I can very easily imagine a parody of it, so it's probably going to go on my list of things to parody, videos to make. So that's all I got. If you want more stuff like that, that's on Program TV. So
killer. I love it.
All right, we're at 50 minutes, so I guess we're done.
There it is.
Cool, we got it. We got it out of the way. All right. Thanks for watching. See everybody next week.
See ya.